This may bring up questions for you, as well as information for you to ponder on in terms of how we have developed the model that we've come up with. The overarching aims is to enable or enhance whakaora whole Māori. So the concept of enabling Māori to practice occupational therapy as Māori. And in order to do this, we really need to be reaching Māori communities and increasing the number of Māori therapists. The second aim was to meet the needs of the community that asked us to step in and do this for them. So we were asked to develop a way of delivering our degree using an apprenticeship model in Te Tau Tokoro. In principle, the reason behind that was to enable the concept of earning and learning, to enable people to learn from home, and to enable them to be able to access health profession education in broader rural and remote regions. So we're looking at Te Tau Tokoro as kind of potentially the beginning, to enhance access to health profession education for diverse populations, particularly Māori, to utilise opportunities to integrate place-based learning, so specific community health challenges, and in particular Mātauranga Māori, and to increase the profile of the profession and community. So Te Tau Tokoro in particular has a long history of lots of vacancies unfilled for occupational therapy, and as a result the profession is quite low profile. And in general, to increase the scope of the profession, so the places that we operate out of and in some of our big cities, there's a lot of role emerging places that are becoming a part of our everyday scope, but that's not reaching the rural and remote regions. For example, ambulances and accident and emergency settings, and to meet the health provision needs of the community. So you can see it's a bit bigger than just working out how to deliver what we deliver through an apprenticeship model. It had some very specific community and rural and remote region motives or agendas behind it. So how we reached work augmented, I do appreciate that it's not normal language, it's a new term, and in fact we had somebody trying to do a little bit of writing on our behalf in terms of justifying this, and they Googled and couldn't find anything in the literature around work augmented learning, and so they said to us, where did you get this from? And we pretty much got it from how we ended up developing what we developed. And I have to give the term work augmented credit to James, who was a part of our development team to begin with, James and Hannah. He just said, well, it's work augmented really, and we all agreed that's what it is. So it's work-based learning doesn't really fit. We do have 1,000 hours of formal fieldwork in our program, and that is pretty much work-based learning. So that's situated with an occupational therapist learning in the field. And that's a World Federation of Occupational Therapy requirement, so we can't get away from that 1,000 hours of fieldwork. So that's in essence a third of our program. Learners are unable to practice occupational therapy skills directly unless they are directly supervised by an occupational therapist. They can practice generic skills, so the kinds of skills that you would want any health professional to have. So they're primarily communication skills, therapeutic relation skills, therapeutic use of self skills. But anything that's specific to occupational therapy can't be practiced as a learner unless you're directly supervised by an occupational therapist. And learners need to learn the breadth of the professional scope. So this is not enabled if they're just learning, being embedded in one workplace with one occupational therapist. The apprenticeship model wasn't able to be supported, particularly in that community in Te Tau Tokoro, for a number of reasons, but primarily there's a lack of professionals for apprentices to be working alongside. There's not enough therapists up there to be able to do this. And there's a lack of resources for the professionals to cope with apprentices. We don't have a system in our hospital setting or our community health services setting where professionals are enabled in terms of time and other resources to teach and mentor and coach and support students. They struggle to meet the requirements for our fieldwork practice, let alone anything in addition to that. And there's a lack of funding for apprentices, so who would pay them? So the work augmented it's pretty much the term that we came up with, or James came up with, because what we are doing is what it says. So work is used as a context to enable deeper learning. It's used as a trigger for learning, and it's used to help the learners make links between what their learning content is for the week in the real world that they are operating in. It enables us to use real life cases. In our existing program, we use scenario-based learning a lot. We have 3 courses in year 2 and 3 courses in year 3 that are scenario-based. This will enable probably a deeper level of learning because it's real world based as opposed to scenario based. And it enables us to really maximize the benefits of peer-assisted learning. So I'll talk more about how we're doing that in a couple of slides' time. So if you've got questions around the work augmented side of it, then hopefully they'll be covered when I get to that. So another agenda is really to better enable Indigenisation of our program. So we've been on an Indigenisation journey and a biculturalisation journey for decades now. And in many respects, we're doing really well. We've had noho marae experiences for our learners for years, and we've always had a cultural safety course, and we've integrated elements of Tau Māori into the other courses more and more as each year goes by. But it's kind of hampered by the fact that we have very few Māori learners, and so there's a real mismatch in the classroom, and we have historically had a lot of non-Māori learners who have a very low level of cultural understanding and awareness and risk. So we end up teaching real fundamental Tau Māori concepts, which of course the Māori learners don't respond easily to. It's kind of like teaching Grammatisaki, and it creates some tension in the classroom. And I think we've managed to work around that, particularly with the noho marae experiences, because that enables our Māori ākonga to really shine and thrive and help their Pākehā cohort to learn a part of their world. But in the traditional classroom, the traditional institutional way that we teach and people learn, that's not as easily enabled. Whereas when we're working in a community with very small cohorts, a community that is predominantly Māori or are more likely to have more Māori learners, there's a much more even playing field. So we can strengthen that Tau Māori lens. We can integrate generic mataranga Māori to a greater extent in the courses, but we can also enable place-based mataranga Māori, sorry, that's my phone just going off. Place-based mataranga Māori integrated into the noho Māori experiences on the campus. So in different regions, the level of or the type of knowledge that's place-based or local is very different from iwi to iwi or region to region. So we can enable that, whereas in Dunedin or Kirikiriroa, which is where we have our existing campus-based programs, we can't really do that because even our Māori learners have come from all over the country. They're not at home. And so from that perspective, learners can learn from and apply what they're learning into their own communities. So that's a bicultural lens for all learners. There are parts of New Zealand where the kura kaupapa graduates are very, very strong in their Māori, obviously the Māori world. And so for them, the learning will be about how to work responsibly and responsively to with Pākehā clients, and vice versa, the non-Māori working with Māori. So you're probably kind of getting the idea that there's a really strong Indigenous agenda behind this, but I think it's also looking at the other members of our populations in rural and remote regions who cannot access traditional degree education in our institutions simply because they can't leave home for 3 years in order to do that. So we have a primarily school leaver, Pākehā female cohort entering our programs on campuses, which means that there are many other people who would not access it because they simply can't leave home for the 3 years that it takes to. So this is the model that we've come up with. Learners will be immersed in online learning. We already have, as everyone does, quite a lot of online learning. We're not increasing the amount of that, but we're changing the way that it's delivered. Our learners for this model will only be engaged in 2 courses at a time rather than the 3 or sometimes 4 courses that they currently engage in. And the online learning will have a lot more diversity in terms of the learning activities and the learning resources that are put up there, and the learning forums that are encouraged for them to engage with. There will be, excuse me, a weekly online hui, probably 3 hours long, which I know sounds like an awful long time for an online meeting. But that will be about an hour and a half with the one course that they're engaged in that week and the other hour and a half for the second course. And we'll have a lot of diversity in terms of what happens in that virtual room for that 3 hours, including the opportunity for therapists from all over the country to come in and speak about their work or their area of practice or any research they've done. So anyone that we can find that will speak to and illustrate how occupational therapy is practiced based on the content that the learners are learning that week. There'll also be opportunity here for, obviously, for breakout rooms for learners to do presentations, have conversations with each other and with the kaimahi in the room with them. And also potentially an opportunity for them to do some of their summative assessments that are presentation based. They'll engage in a weekly day on campus for each learning week, 1 full day in campus. So for Te Tokoro, we're looking at delivering out of Whangarei and Ngāwha and Kaitaia. So we had very clear messaging from the community that if we deliver just from Whangarei, then people in Kaitaia will be disadvantaged. They won't be able to access it. So we've worked out a way where hopefully it'll work with us delivering out of the 3 campuses and therefore enable access for more people. In terms of the fieldwork, we're keeping the fieldwork experiences exactly the same as they are with our current campus-based program. So that's a couple of longitudinal placements, which are half a day a week across a number of weeks. And for those placements, we can integrate them into the weekly day on campus. And then the other fieldwork experiences are a full 4-week block in year 1 and an 8-week block in year 2 and an 8-week block in year 3. So we'll structure and operate those exactly the same as we do with our campus-based program. They'll be encouraged to go to other parts of the country in order to fulfill those fieldwork requirements. For any learners who are unable to leave home for that 4 weeks or 8 weeks, then we'll try as hard as we can to get them diversity of placements in Te Tokoro. There is actually enough diversity there, and we intentionally plan to roll out in July, have a July intake, so that all of our fieldwork placements across the country are out of sync. And so the demand on the profession won't be as great. And then the work augmented component. So learners need to be in work. They need to be in work that we consider to be appropriate work. So that's any front-facing health and wellbeing service or setting, or education service or setting where an occupational therapist might feasibly be situated or practice. We can't stipulate that they need to be with an occupational therapist because that won't work. It won't meet many of our overarching needs. Like, first and foremost, there aren't enough therapists up there in those settings. But secondly, that wouldn't help us kind of enhance or grow the scope and profile of the profession. So there's a number of different roles that they might be situated in, all of the kaiwhina roles, the teacher aide roles, the gym instructor assistant roles, the healthcare assistant roles, the mental health support worker roles. So all of those roles are considered to be appropriate. We're asking that learners are engaged in a minimum of 15 hours work per week. They can be working full-time if they want. We're not stipulating that they have to be in paid employment, but if they are in a volunteer role, it does need to be, very similar to or close to one of those roles that I just talked about. And we've done that to enable the prospective ākonga who are caregivers for family members to enter this program, because obviously if they're working with just a family member as their primary role, it's not ethical or safe for us to expect them to apply all of their learning to that one family member or to share the detail about that family member with the group. So we're augmenting the caregiver role with a family member with the opportunity for paid employment or have a volunteer role as well. Sorry, it's on auto. So in terms of the work augmented learning, we're using the workplace as a trigger for learning and as a for them to apply their learning. I will move on to the next slide, actually. It makes more sense. It enables them to make really strong links between what they're learning in the classroom and the real world. And it enables us to replace, as I said, the scenario-based learning courses with real life scenarios or cases of people that they're working with. We won't be able to, like, we're keeping work and study separate in terms of their employment situation is their employment situation. So they need to do what they need to do at work. And the person responsible for managing them and their work is their employer or their manager at work. And so we don't have the right to step in and change what we expect them to do at work. So we need to make sure that all of the exercises that we're giving them to do, they can fit into their work as it is. So most of it will be reflections, will be targeted observations, targeted conversations with peers or colleagues or clients, and also opportunities to practice some of the what we're calling generic work skills. So that's the people, relationship, communication-based skills that I talked about earlier. We also need to make sure that we protect them from the employer's expectations that they can, because they're halfway through an do some occupational therapy, because that's not legal. They can't do that until they are registered. So I think on the whole, employers will be supportive, but we did get some feedback up there that some employers might be pressuring them into doing some occupational therapy before they're ready. We'll use the classroom a lot for really cementing and embedding the learning from work. I'll give you a couple of examples just so that I can really illustrate what we're talking about here. So the week that they, for example, are learning about the recovery model and strengths-based language, which is something from mental health that we specifically teach, we will be getting them to listen out for strengths-based language at work and to write down examples of what they've heard in terms of strengths-based language or comments or conversations between other staff members and clients. And also listen out for deficit-based language, and then try and work out what the benefits of strengths-based language is, what it's giving or doing, examples of where it perhaps wasn't used but could have been used, but also examples of where deficit-based language was appropriate. And then when they come back into the classroom, they can share kōrero around what they heard and how that was. And because they'll be in really diverse work areas, they'll be learning from each other. So strengths-based language working in a primary school with children with developmental coordination disorder might look and sound and be quite different from someone working in an acute mental health service or someone working in a gymnasium or somebody working in an orthopedic ward. And so with that conversation between them, that'll deepen and broaden their understanding of strengths-based language and its benefits. So hopefully that example's helped. How am I going for time? I'm probably fine actually, because I'm speaking very quickly. There will be opportunity for you to ask questions. Probably the bigger picture, the Te Tokoro it will be piloted, although we are going to take a second cohort in the second year, because we do need to make sure that we teach out everyone, and there's a good chance that there will be one or two learners who are either part-time or who don't achieve in the first year. We need to offer it in the second year, so the plan is just to roll into the second year. But ultimately, once we've ironed out the glitches that we will probably come across that we haven't anticipated, then the idea is to be able to deliver in other regions. Tairāwhiti is probably our second region, and this slide hopefully illustrates the cost efficiencies that come from delivering more broadly than just one region. So everything in the bubble in the middle is what we can do from one place. So that's lost the word for it, but that's what's centralised. That's the word for it, centralised. So the weekly online hui, the online learning resources, the day on campus content, all of the background processes, the work-based learning activities, and the fieldwork coordination is all centralised. And what each region will still need to provide is the employer liaison service that we have built into this model, the face-to-face day on campus facilitation that we have built into this model. So the lecturers will be streaming in, but each campus will have a learning facilitator in the room with the learners. And then the learner support that needs to be done on the ground face-to-face. That's all I have to share formally, other than answers to any questions or any comments welcome as well. I feel like we started from absolute scratch because no one has done anything like this in New Zealand before. What I didn't say is that we chose to use our same existing program document. So it's the same program that we have at the moment, same courses, same assessments. The assessment methods might shift a little bit. We might have more presentation, more poster presentation, or more to a kind of teaching, so people teaching each other and we're assessing their knowledge through how they're doing the teaching session. But we equally will have written assignments and exams. Yeah. Did I speak so fast you didn't get anything? Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question. So the integration of the workplace, or I always have questions, everybody. The integration of the workplace where you have, they're not necessarily they're not working as an OT, but they're working in a workspace, and you said in a health environment. I can sort of see that connection. And you're also saying in an education environment. Can you explain to me how the education environment provides you with the opportunity for that kind of exposure? It might be something about OT that I just don't understand.
Yeah, possibly is. So occupational therapists do work in schools,
Right.
more commonly in primary schools than secondary, but they work with classrooms and with individuals, with children with specific learning disabilities or physical needs, where occupational therapy can help the teacher work out how best to meet that student's learning needs. And there's some elements of occupational therapy specifically that's around helping those children with whatever those conditions or disorders are. In secondary schools, it's more commonly around some of the mental health and trauma triggered issues, behavioural issues that young people have. That's not so common, but it is emerging. Yeah.
So supplementary, then the employer is aware that, of course, they're aware, but there's a difference between being aware and then deliberately providing opportunities to observe or be involved with. I'm thinking about a large primary school that's got 700 pupils, and it's a really busy day, and you're working in this area over here, and something over there happens which might give you good fodder for your course. Is that discussed? How is it brought about? How do you make that happen so the learner has the experience, so they're not just sitting on a reception desk, answering phone calls?
Yeah. Yeah. So we're specifically saying it needs to be front facing with people. You need to be working with people. So not working as an administrator or a sectionist in that area. Sure. So in a primary school, it would be a teacher aide. That would be the role that best would suit this. And so a teacher aide is likely to have all the experiences that they need in order to link the learning from the course to their everyday work. We're not likely to have to say, hey, you need to do something different at work, because we don't actually have the right to do that. We do have a tripartite memorandum of cooperation that is between us, the employer, and the learner. And so, and that will enable a relationship between someone at work and us and the learner to problem solve any problems or issues that might come up in terms of study and work, and also enable clarification. So if, for example, the employer is making demands on the learner that is impacting on their study. It might be, for example, I don't know, maybe they've agreed to paid release for the day on campus, and then suddenly they say, no, we can't release you. Like, that would be an issue for us and the learner. So that agreement kind of gives us a way in terms of negotiating with that. But it also will help us work with the employer in terms of how they can be advantaged by having an occupational therapy student in work. So an example might be a learner activity where they plan an education session that would be appropriate for their workplace, for the staff there. And then the opportunity would be for them to actually present that. Now, of course, the employer can say, no, we don't want you in presenting, but I should imagine that more often than not, employers would say, yes, you can have the next in-service education slot, for example, or we'll have a little lunchtime session because we really love to see you present on this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, kia ora, Helen. Hey, thanks. That's a really interesting project. Good to hear about. My question is really about how you manage the activity of assessment within the region. So I imagine that most of your subject expertise sits in Otago. So how do you sort of manage the activity of practical assessment for learners that are sort of in far-flung locations like Pangaru?
Yeah, really good question. So in terms of assessment, I think what you're talking about is staffing as much as assessment, isn't it? So the kaiaka who will be streaming in, the lecturers who will be streaming in, delivering content, setting up the learning activities for the day on campus and working through that session. Some will be from the region because this gives an opportunity for really experienced therapists to step into academia a little bit, which an experience they would never ordinarily have. But it will also be a number of us as well as the existing subject matter experts. So we'll be teaching. The assessments will be pretty much as they are at the moment. So there's pretty much the same assessment guidelines. So that's written work, and that's presentations and teaching sessions and vivas, oral assessments. And we can do all of those pretty much as we do now. In terms of assessing skills, that's generally speaking in our program left to that 1,000 hours of field work. So that's where their skill in applying occupational therapy is assessed. And that's assessed by the therapist that they're with for that placement, for that 8 weeks or 4. So not changing that will happen. The bit that we have tussled with and we found a solution for is the workshops that have to be delivered face-to-face in a room with the students by an occupational therapist. And so we've integrated those into the noho marae. So the noho marae experiences, there'll be 4 of them in the first year, 2 in the second year and 2 in the third year. And each of them will be 3 days long, 3 days, 2 nights. A lot of that will be for the Mataranga Māori content that's specific to that region. But equally, that's our opportunity to have the 3 cohorts in Taitau together in Whangarei. We'll use the North Tech Marae. And the expert in terms of the workshops that we have integrated into our existing programs. So, for example, they learn to make splints. They learn splinting. So we'll do the splinting workshop in one of those moving and handling people without damaging your back. So we'll integrate that into the noho marae. So the skills-based workshops will be done on marae simply because that's convenient and an awesome place as well, particularly in Whangarei because the marae is on campus, and so we have the nursing facilities on campus as well to make use of. Did that answer your question?
Question.
Yeah.
Just imagine a future state where all this is going well in the far north and you're getting graduates coming through and you're really happy with them. Is there a plan to to look at this, because I know you're in Hamilton as well and been there for years, to look at other modes of, or this type of delivery model elsewhere?
Yeah, there is. So step 2 is to deliver in another region, perhaps Tairāwhiti. But we can see no reason why it won't work in many regions. And even in, I mean, it might even work in the cities, but we just want to start with one and see how it goes. But yeah. It can definitely be nationalised. And it will certainly be more cost effective once we roll out into a second region. We've developed it so that we can be nimble, and even with the staffing, the way that we're looking to staff it, at least to begin with, is a way where if for some reason we need to close down, so if, for example, Te Tokoro is saturated with occupational therapists within 5 or 6 years, and it's just not fair to be rolling out more graduates, then the way we're looking at staffing it is in a way where we can potentially just move on to another region or move out of Te Tokoro without disadvantaging a huge number of people. Yeah.
Helen, sorry, Anna, you go.
I was just going to say, just part of that, like, nimbleness around regions, or part of that nationalisation, the plan is that all of the things that you pointed to as central would stay centralised, and you can effectively add other people into that online centralised space without it, like, needing to increase in terms of provision. And then so the bit that gets added is the portion that is regional. So you can add a whole program into a region, but by only in the region actually adding the on-site stuff. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. So the online hui, for example, it would be able to be delivered at the same time by the same people, saying the same things all around the country, or just in one region. Yeah.
I think so.
And Helen, I know we talked about this the other day when we spoke, but how important would Spatu Ora and the Occupational Therapy Board to the work that you've done here?
How important are they? Was that your question?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So the Occupational Therapy Board and NZQA obviously need to approve this model of delivery. The program's already approved because it's our existing program. So they have both approved everything that we've submitted. So the concept they've approved. They just need to do the final site approval, which is planned for the week after next. So big panel meeting up in Whangarei and Nafa the week after next. Te Whatu Ora is definitely on board, and they are planning to attend that site meeting and in support of this program. And they're currently working out how best they can pragmatically support us. So whether they want to develop more occupational therapy assistant or allied health assistant roles and support those people through the program, or whether they have enough existing staff who want to enter the program. But they're very keen to see us increase the scope and profile of the profession in that region. And they're probably our biggest supporter when it comes to that. They're the ones that are, as Te Whatu Ora, who's saying to us, get your learners into A&E if you can, get your learners into the Hauora service provider settings, get your learners into the really remote regions, because we need health professions. And occupational therapy is, because it's so diverse, it's a really ideal profession to start in this way. We can work in primary schools and in acute mental health units and communities and Hauora service providers and orthopaedic wards and pediatrics and elder care everywhere. So they're very keen to see us expand, and because of that, hopefully they'll be able to pragmatically support us as well. Andrew.
Sorry, just one quick question. I'm wondering, Helen, whether you could talk through the financial dynamics of this program. I mean, at Open Polytechnic, we have a number of programs like that have some similarities to this, and we've found them extraordinarily expensive to maintain. So our initial teacher education program has quite a lot of parallels, but but it's very difficult to make work on the funding rates from TEC and we're somewhat limited by student fees that we can charge. So how are you working through that? Which, because I imagine the number of noho marae you're delivering, I know aren't cheap. You're probably somewhat limited in terms of cohort size that you can enroll in taitokoro. So how are you managing that? Is there alternative forms of income that you can access to support this project?
We haven't found alternative sources of income. We're in the process of applying for a higher band for funding through TEC because we're sitting on a lower band than equitable professions such as physiotherapy. Yeah, so we think we're hopeful that we'll get that. It's not fiscally viable as it stands at the moment, and so we are in a position where we're waiting with bated breath for Te Pukenga to do its sign off or otherwise. So it's all pending approval. Once we roll out into a second region, it gets closer to being to looking good financially. But I would be really interested in talking with you, perhaps in just you and I at some time about your experience with the teacher training, because there might be some learning from us for you. The noho marae, like we're doing the taitokoro element of it in partnership with North Tech. So we have a contract with North Tech, and in that contract, we pay them some money, and they provide us with very cheap access to the marae and to the people that are qualified to do that teaching. And I think one of the advantages of being embedded in a community that is so Māori and so supported by iwi, like the iwi are very excited about this. They're prepared to support us in ways that perhaps a more Pākehā community might not. So there's a lot of stuff that we're getting for free and a lot of support that learners are getting that they're not getting through the traditional system. They're getting from iwi-based services. So that's kind of helpful. But yeah, it's expensive. And it might not fly because of that. That's probably our vulnerability. That's the reason we put learning facilitators in the classroom and not lecturers. So we put people who are not lecturers, they're not academics, they're just there to facilitate the learning. And that's why we have the lecturers streaming in to make it that little bit cheaper, a big bit cheaper. Yeah. Lena?
Hello, Helen. I just have one quick question for this model. Do you see that this model in the future that actually will supersede the current delivery model, or you still see the values of delivering two models and to give more options?
At the moment, we're thinking that there's more value in delivering two models because we acknowledge that there are a lot of people who just want to go and be a student for 3 years, be a scarfie in Ōtepoti or Kirikiriroa, and particularly school leavers. So it is a thing that a lot of people value, and probably a lot, respond better to the traditional classroom type opportunities. So we'll definitely keep both going, but who knows what the future will look like. Maybe in 20 years' time it will be different. We have toyed with the idea of, not in the first few years, but the idea of offering it in Dunedin or Hamilton to sit alongside our existing program, just to see how that affects numbers. One of the benefits and one of the reasons why we are using the same program document is that learners can shift from one to the other if they choose to. So, for example, we have a lovely young Māori therapist in Taitokoro who's one of our graduates, and she chose to come to Dunedin to be a scarfie for those 3 years. But she said, had this program been up there, she would never have left home. It was just awful for her to be away from home for that time. With this model, the learners can shift. If they can do year one in the campus space, and then they can do year 2 and 3 in the work augmented, or vice versa. If they decide that actually work augmented is not for them, they can shift to the campus space model.
Do you have the results to compare to the students' outcome for the both models? And is it one have feedbacks as better or worse than the other?
We haven't done it yet, so we have no idea. Yeah,
Right,
we're
right.
rolling. We're beginning delivery. So long as everything's signed off, it's still pending approval from NZQA, OTBNZ, and Tapu Kinga sign off of the budget. They've signed off well, they've asked us to do it, but the budget's not signed off. So yeah, we don't have any comparison.
Oh yes, sorry. I'm aware of that. I should ask a different question about this. It's
Okay.
more like, have some students feedbacks on the ideas of having those different models delivery, and do they have feedbacks on how they feel about different models?
Yes, yeah. So we've had some good feedback from learners saying, I would have done that had it been an option for me. And we're currently engaged in a piece of research. One of our lecturers is researching our existing learners who are working as well as studying. Many of our learners are working as well as studying for financial reasons. So they're doing some research with the learners who are working in the kinds of roles that we are anticipating our learners will be in, to try and ascertain what the value of their work is to their learning, which will be really interesting to discover whether what we're anticipating the value will be is what our existing learners are already experiencing.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. Hannah.
Yeah, I was just going to add in, not in an occupational therapy setting, but we've been able to, in the engineering program that came before this one, we've been able to do some student surveys doing exactly that comparison. And there is quite a lot of literature available from international things as well around comparisons of people in traditional taught pathways and people in augmented settings that I'd be happy to talk about or share. But yeah, there's some really common themes around people in the workplace settings have challenges that the face-to-face campus students don't, around stuff like balancing work and life can be really hard, but also dealing with like shifting employer expectations, like Helen was saying, like where there's specific things that people can and can't do as they progress through study, and employers not always understanding that well. And some of the like vulnerabilities around like when our students do a bad job or they muck something up in class, the consequences are actually really low because they learn from that and then they do better the next time in the paper. But when they're also in a workplace at the same time and they do that, there's a concern that like the consequences could be higher, or that they've kind of got more at stake all the time. There's not that separation that's in place. But then on the positive side, which I think usually does outweigh some of that, there's lots of things around, and we've found it to be true in our setting as well, around people being able to grow their like professional skills and networks in a way that they never could when they're sitting in a classroom environment. We've had a consistent problem where people have got partway through our program and become so good at their jobs that they then get promoted into roles where they're too busy to finish. So one of our barriers to them completing is actually that suddenly they're too good and important and they don't have time to keep studying, which is arguably not a bad thing in their career trajectories. But yeah, so like there is lots of available that we'd be happy to share.
Yeah. And I think that's why I really emphasize that we're keeping work and study very separate. It's because they can't, even if they are clearly showing the potential to be a fantastic occupational therapist, they can't even begin to be one of them until they're registered.
Yeah, which is a really
because it's illegal
for you. Yeah, whereas our students can do some engineering stuff. Somebody has to check it to make sure it's correct, but they can make suggestions into a design. They can do some of that. Yeah, but and I think as well, Helen, in your health setting, there are vulnerabilities in terms of the people that your learners are working with that are significant in that health setting that are different there as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Apart from Andrew's question around the financial viability of this, does anyone have any other challenges or feedback?
For me, there's a couple of things. Sorry, I just can't handle the void. You open the doors, I'm going to do it. For me, there's lots of different ways in which you can skin a cat, and this is one of them. And so we're going to be looking at it to see how it functions. So the ways that we're conceiving things at the moment are quite different to what you're doing. About the only real parallel is that we're going to be running two programs at the same time. Running the same, more or less the same material. But there's going to be, I think we're going to get multiple different ways to do this. To pick up Hannah's point, it depends, I think, a lot on the profession, what can be allowed. So with engineering or a lot of your trades-based stuff, as long as somebody's there with them, they can get a lot of like in-depth experience and build those commercial networks immediately instead of having to leave and then get a job and all the rest of it. So there's some real value in that. And with the regulations, obviously bound that for health. Clearly, you don't want people making mistakes in health too soon. So I think with the variety of industries that we're working in, we're going to see lots of different models, and I think that's okay. I don't think we need a single model to do things. We build it to meet that particular need.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is okay. And I think that the health professions are a little bit different because of the potential risk of getting something a little bit wrong, let alone very wrong. In terms of the networking and the socialisation into the profession, we have thought about that and built that into this program in a way that is probably better, or definitely better, than our campus-based delivery. So, for example, on the campus-based delivery, our learners have access to us. So a handful of occupational therapists, many of whom have worked in academia for a long time and not in practice. Whereas the work augmented model, almost every learning week, we anticipate having an occupational therapist present from somewhere around the country, a different one every week. We're also using a mentor, like a style of mentoring model. So each learner will have access to 10 sessions with an occupational therapist mentor per year. And we're hoping to mentor Māori ākonga with Māori therapists, although we may not have enough Māori therapists. Anyway, that's the idea. We'll work on that. But that's for support and helping them make links between what they're learning and how it might be useful in occupational therapy. So talking from the perspective of a therapist, and perhaps a little bit of coaching and encouragement and nurturing, but it's not about assessment or teaching. So that's about socialisation into the profession as well. So that will help them build their networks and their understanding of all the different spaces and places that therapists can work beyond what they learn about in class or see in their world. Yeah. Emolina?
Yes, actually, just build on that. I have similar questions. How do you engage the industry employers and to jump on board and to say, well, we'll provide those opportunities for your students to in the workplace, and what's their I think from their side is what's their benefits, and I can definitely see some of those, but also what's their input, like how much effort they need to input to support this.
So we can't really direct what employers are prepared to do. We've developed we call it levels of support. So a document that lays out the levels of support that they might choose, from full support, which means paid release for time out of work, payment of fees, and perhaps some extra, like some study time that they can use in work time as well. So that's what will cost them the most, all the way down to the implications for the learner if there's absolutely no employer support other than having to be released from work for that time. So that's been useful for employers to get a handle on what it will cost them if they do the full support thing. It works out to be, over the 3 years, it works out to be just over 0.3 of the employee's time that of work. But that's obviously not each week, that's averaged. So they have that chunk of 8 weeks in year 2 and year 3, which is quite a commitment for many employers. To answer your question in more detail, we've kind of got there's two things emerging. So Te Whatu Ora and the mainstream services are looking at filling vacancies and getting more people into the community to meet the health needs of the community. So that's their goal. The Māori service providers are really motivated to help lift their people. So they're motivated to support staff members into a degree level program and have them graduate as a professional and even move on. It's not about necessarily holding them and having their skills. They'll encourage them to move on and practice wherever they want to practice as an occupational therapist, and they'll move on to a new bunch of people for us. So that's the kind of that Māori concept of, you know, awhi and support. And so the two agendas are quite different. You know, we've had Māori say, look, we'll support you. We haven't, like, there's nothing in concrete yet, there's nothing signed up, but I had one Hauora service provider say, we can support 5 learners into your program in July. And I said, can you do that every year, or just is this a one-off? And they said, well, we can do it at the very least every 3 years, because as the first 5 graduate, we'll support 5 more in. Yeah, so that, I mean, that's, you know, it's interesting that there's those two different agendas behind support for learners, and there's probably more as well.